In 2006, Circuit City generated more than $12 billion in annual revenue and operated 712 stores across the United States. 2 years later, it filed for bankruptcy. By early 2009, the company was gone. The collapse did not begin with a market crash or a technological shock. It began with a decision that looked, at the time, financially rational: remove higher-paid employees from the sales floor to cut costs. The savings were immediate. The consequences were slower. What killed Circuit City was not a single mistake. It was a sequence of optimizations that made sense locally and failed systemically. At its peak, Circuit City was a machine built for a very specific retail environment. Customers drove to large-format stores. They browsed television stacked along brightly lit walls. They asked questions. They compared specifications. They left with products loaded directly into their cars. The company's core mechanism was commissioned sales. Employees were not simply clerks. They were specialists: home audio, televisions, computers, cameras. Compensation rewarded product knowledge and closing ability. The structure created incentives for staff to learn technical details and guide purchasing decisions. For a time, this worked brilliantly. Consumer electronics were expensive, complex, and intimidating. Shoppers needed assistance. Manufacturers needed shelf space. Circuit City sat between them, converting confusion into transaction. Scale reinforced the advantage. Hundreds of stores produced purchasing leverage with suppliers. Advertising budgets supported national campaigns. Inventory systems synchronized product launches across regions. The retail footprint created psychological permanence. The brand became infrastructure. Friday evenings, holiday weekends, major sporting events, these were not merely sales periods. They were rituals. But embedded inside this strength was a fragility disguised as efficiency. Commission structures are expensive during downturns and rigid during transition. When margins tighten, labor costs resist compression. By the early 2000s, the retail landscape began to shift, not dramatically, not suddenly, gradually. Flat-screen televisions replaced bulky CRTs. Prices declined faster. Product cycles accelerated. Specifications became less decisive for average buyers. Simultaneously, a new competitor gained traction using a fundamentally different model. Best Buy structured its stores around open browsing rather than commissioned selling. Employees were salaried or hourly. The sales floor emphasized accessibility over persuasion. The environment felt less transactional, less pressured, more exploratory. Initially, the contrast did not appear existential. Circuit City still generated billions in revenue. Stores remained busy. The commission model had decades of proof behind it. Best Buy's approach looked softer, less disciplined, potentially less productive per employee. Leadership assessments were not irrational. Commissions had historically driven higher sales per labor dollar. Specialists increased attachment rates. Complex products benefited from guided selling. Removing commissions risked collapsing expertise. Yet cost pressures accumulated. Margins in consumer electronics compressed year after year. Televisions, once premium items, became competitive commodities. Price matching intensified. Promotional cycles shortened. In 2003, Circuit City eliminated commission sales. The change reduced compensation variability and simplified payroll expenses. It also removed the primary incentive structure that had sustained deep product specialization. The impact was subtle at first. Stores still functioned. Employees still assisted customers, but the knowledge gradient began to flatten. Training investments produced weaker returns. Staff turnover increased. The sales floor slowly lost its technical density. Meanwhile, competitors moved differently. Best Buy doubled down on service layers, including its acquisition of Geek Squad in 2002. Technical support became a differentiator rather than a cost center. Assistance extended beyond purchase decisions into installation and troubleshooting. The comparison was not immediately catastrophic. Circuit City still had scale, brand recognition, supplier relationships, and national reach. But something structural had shifted. Electronics retail was becoming less about persuasion and more about experience and support. 3 years later, financial pressure intensified. Revenue growth stalled. Operating costs remained anchored to large-format leases. Inventory risks increased as product cycles accelerated. Management faced familiar constraints: reduce expenses without shrinking footprint too aggressively. In 2007, Circuit City terminated approximately 3,400 employees, many of its most experienced, highest-paid sales associates. The justification was mathematical. Replacing senior staff with lower-wage workers produced immediate labor savings. Payroll expenses declined. Short-term earnings projections improved. The decision aligned with cost control logic widely accepted across retail. What the models could not fully capture was informational loss. Experience in electronics retail is not merely tenure. It is accumulated technical intuition, product memory, customer pattern recognition. Removing higher-paid employees also removed disproportionate expertise. The savings were immediate. The degradation was incremental. Customer interactions grew shorter. Recommendations grew more generic. Complex purchasing decisions migrated elsewhere. At the same time, another competitor expanded rapidly, one without stores at all. Amazon reshaped consumer expectation around price transparency and convenience. The early threat appeared limited. Electronics remained tactile purchases. Shoppers wanted to see screens, compare brightness, handle devices. Shipping times introduced friction. Returns felt uncertain. Physical retailers still possessed experiential advantages. The purchasing behavior began to bifurcate. Customers visited stores for evaluation and completed transactions online. Showrooming emerged not as defection but as arbitrage. Retailers bore the costs of demonstration. Online platforms captured the margins. Circuit City's responses followed recognizable logic. Price matching policies tightened. Promotional cycles intensified. Inventory commitments increased to maintain assortment breadth. Stores attempted to compete simultaneously on price, selection, and cost discipline. These objectives conflicted. Lower prices reduced margins. Reduced margins demanded cost reduction. Cost reductions weakened service quality. Weaker service quality pushed customers toward competitors, emphasizing experience or convenience. Debt compounded the constraint set. Large format retail footprints are capital intensive and inflexible. Lease obligations persist regardless of revenue volatility. Store closures introduce write-downs. Aggressive contraction signals distress to suppliers and lenders. Every option carried asymmetric penalties. Cut prices, margins collapse. Cut staff, experience collapses. Close stores, scale collapses. Maintain course, cash flow collapses. By 2008, the pressures converged. Credit markets tightened. Consumer spending weakened. Electronics demand decelerated. Liquidity constraints sharpened. Vendor relationships strained under delayed payments and declining volumes. In November 2008, Circuit City filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy protection. The filing listed billions in obligations against shrinking operational flexibility. Stores remained open. Stabilization efforts continued. Restructuring strategies circulated. Buyers were considered. But institutional erosion had already progressed. Inventory flows tightened. Credit insurers withdrew support. Customer confidence deteriorated. Foot traffic declined further. The company entered a procedural phase. Stores closed in waves. Liquidation sales accelerated. Employees departed. Systems designed for expansion managed contraction instead. Sentence by sentence, location by location, the network unwound. In January 2009, Circuit City announced liquidation. 567 stores prepared for closure. Decades of retail infrastructure dissolved within months. What disappeared was not merely a company, but a particular retail logic. Circuit City represented an era when expertise was embedded directly in physical space, when product complexity justified specialized human mediation, when large format stores functioned as both distribution channels and educational environments. That model did not fail overnight. It became misaligned. Electronics simplified for consumers while accelerating technologically. Price transparency increased. Online convenience improved. Service expectations shifted from persuasion toward support and integration. Circuit City optimized repeatedly for cost stability inside a system that was changing faster than its structural commitments allowed. Each decision made sense within its immediate frame. Eliminate commissions to control expenses. Replace higher-paid employees to protect margins. Compete on price to preserve traffic. Expand promotions to defend revenue. Individually defensible. Collectively destabilizing. The replacement system emerged quickly. Purchases migrated online. Experience migrated to competitors, emphasizing environment and service layers. Expertise detached from the sales floor and reassembled into support ecosystems, review platforms, and digital comparison tools. The memory faded more slowly. For years, Circuit City had been a default destination, not just for products but for reassurance, a place where uncertainty could be converted into explanation, where technical questions had physical addresses. When that infrastructure disappeared, nothing visibly dramatic occurred. Consumers adapted. Transactions continued. But a certain relationship between knowledge, retail, and physical presence quietly ended. And it did not return.